What if a galactic empire that had never lost a single war in 10,000 years decided your tiny little planet was its next trophy? And what if you didn't even know they were coming, that you didn't even know they existed? That was the exact nightmare humanity was about to walk into. The Valoran Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds, and nobody had ever put up a real fight. At the tip of their spear was High Commander Cyrus, a legendary warrior who had personally brought 37 planets to their knees. If you find this story as crazy as I do, stick around to see what happens when the biggest bully in the galaxy picks a fight with the wrong little guy. Cyrus scanned the council with his 4 piercing eyes, his contempt so thick you could cut it with a knife. While these politicians debated, he was out there winning wars. "Council members," his voice echoed like thunder, "I present our next target, a little backwater world on a forgotten spiral arm of the galaxy. The natives call it Earth." With a flick of his clawed hand, a stunning hologram of our blue and green home popped into existence, spinning peacefully in the air. "As you can see, it's primitive," he sneered, flashing a row of razor-sharp teeth. "The dominant species, these humans, have barely figured out how to get to their own moon. Their fastest ships are basically tin cans." He let the council soak it in. But here's the best part. They're a complete disaster. They're divided into hundreds of tiny tribes constantly fighting over dirt, rocks, and silly ideas. They've even built weapons that could destroy their own cities and have come dangerously close to using them on each other more than once. A wave of smug laughter rolled through the chamber. A species that wages war on itself? To the perfectly unified Valorans, the idea was just pathetic. "Their weapons are toys," Cyrus went on. "They use exploding chemicals and flimsy metal. No energy shields, no light speed travel, nothing. Taking their planet will be like taking a toy from a toddler." He let the silence hang, his overconfidence filling the room. "I request a fleet of 500 ships. In 1 month, that world will be ours. We'll strip its resources and add another jewel to the Dominion's crown." The council members were already nodding. It was business as usual. But just as the decision was about to be made, a voice cut through the room like glass. "I object." Every single head snapped towards the shadows. From the darkness emerged a figure that made even the mighty Cyrus flinch. It was Elder Chaos, the ancient archivist. Nobody knew how old he was, but some whispered he was there when the Dominion was first founded. Chaos hobbled forward, his staff tapping rhythmically on the crystal floor. The politicians shifted nervously. The elder almost never attended these meetings, and when he did, it was never good news. "Elder Chaos," the council leader said, his voice laced with surprise. "You object to this conquest?" "I do," Chaos rasped, his voice old but strong. "I am here to give you one simple warning. Do not attack Earth. Do not provoke the humans." Cyrus let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "Respectfully, Elder, have you lost your mind? They're practically cavemen with rockets. What threat could they possibly be to 500 of our warships?" Chaos slowly turned his ancient eyes to the High Commander. There was something in that gaze that made Cyrus's laughter die in his throat. "I've spent a very long life studying the history of this galaxy," Chaos said, his words deliberate and heavy. "I have read the records of 10,000 fallen civilizations, and in the ashes of all those dead empires, one warning appears again and again." He lifted his staff and slammed it down. The sound cracked like lightning. "Do not wake the humans." The room fell into a dead, chilling silence. "What are you talking about?" the council leader stammered. Chaos walked to the hologram and waved a withered hand. The image of Earth dissolved, replaced by ancient star charts. "These are records from civilizations that vanished long before we ever took to the stars," he explained. "Many of them mention Earth." He pointed to a fading script. This is from the Kathrani. They ruled this galaxy for 50,000 years, and then one day, they were just gone. What happened to them? A counselor asked. The details are lost, Chaos said, but their final transmissions speak of a blue world and a species of unthinkable rage. The Kathrani wrote that they had made a fatal mistake, that they woke something that should have been left sleeping. Chaos showed them another record, then another. The Varath Collective, the Cathari Empire, all galactic superpowers in their time. All had encountered Earth, all had left behind the same cryptic warning, and all of them were now extinct. Cyrus stormed forward. These are myths, Elder, fairy tales. You can't expect us to abandon a conquest because of ghost stories. Chaos faced him directly. Let me tell you what I know about humans, Commander. They evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill them every single day. Their world has ice ages that bury continents in glaciers. It has predators designed to tear them to shreds. It has invisible plagues that can wipe out millions. The very ground they stand on explodes. He paused, letting the words sink in. And yet, they survived. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they are the most stubborn creatures I've ever encountered. They simply refused to lose. When the world froze, they skinned animals and mastered fire. When monsters hunted them, they learned to hunt the monsters. When the world fell apart around them, they just built it again. You see them fighting each other and you call it a weakness, Chaos said, his voice rising. But you're wrong. What I see is a species that has been practicing warfare since they learned how to walk. Every single one of them is descended from a long line of survivors who fought through hell. War doesn't scare them, Commander. War is their natural state. They understand it better than we ever will. Cyrus stood his ground. They have never faced an enemy like us. Their pathetic toys can't scratch our shields. Whatever they've dealt with on their little mud ball is nothing compared to the Valoran Dominion. That, Chaos said softly, is precisely what I'm afraid of. You are about to give this species, for the first time in its history, a single, common enemy. You are about to unite them. He turned back to the stunned council. I've studied them. Humans are a walking paradox. They create breathtaking art and weapons of pure horror. They preach peace and prepare for war, but one trait defines them above all others. Chaos's voice dropped to a whisper that echoed in the silent hall. When faced with extinction, humans don't surrender. They don't run. They don't beg. A survival instinct buried deep in their core kicks in, and they refuse to accept defeat. And when they finally commit to a fight, a real fight, they will do things that we can't even comprehend. The Council Prime leaned forward. Such as? They will sacrifice everything, Chaos said. Other species fight to live. Humans will fight to make sure their enemy dies with them. They will burn their own cities to the ground to deny you a victory. They will shatter their own planet before they let you have it. They will send their children into a battle they know they can't survive, just for the slimmest chance that their grandchildren might live free. Imagine being told that the very things that make you human, your passion, your stubbornness, your will to survive, are seen by others as a sign of insanity. The Council just couldn't grasp it. That just tells me they're crazy, the leader scoffed, and insanity is no match for superior firepower. Elder, you've been reading too many old stories. The math is simple. We have 500 state-of-the-art warships. They have rockets that run on glorified gasoline. This isn't war, he declared with finality. It's pest control. The council members nodded, their confidence restored. The elders' warnings were spooky, but they couldn't argue with the facts. The vote was called. All in favor of the conquest of Earth? Nearly every hand in the chamber shot up. The motion passes, the leader announced. High Commander Cyrus, you have your orders. Bring that world into the fold. Cyrus bowed, a triumphant smirk on his face. As he turned to leave, he saw Elder Chaos standing by the exit, his ancient face filled not with anger, but with something that looked terrifyingly like pity. Imagine being so arrogant you're about to make the biggest mistake in your empire's 1,000-year history, and only one old man sees it coming. Elder Chaos, the Council Prime said into the echoing silence, do you have any final thoughts? Chaos didn't even turn around at the door. Just one, he said, his voice booming through the hall. I've been alive for centuries, and I've seen this story before. A great empire gets cocky. It thinks it's invincible. Then it pokes a bear it doesn't understand, and it gets torn to shreds. He began to walk away. The humans have a saying, let sleeping dogs lie. You're about to kick the biggest, meanest dog this galaxy has ever seen. You won't believe how humanity turns the tables on these invaders, so stick around. And when it wakes up, he called back over his shoulder, don't come crying to me. The massive doors slammed shut, sealing his warning away. A young commander named Sarath watched him go, completely unfazed. The elder is wise, but he's gone soft. I'll depart for Earth this week. The new colony will be yours in a month. The council erupted in applause. This was going to be a glorious, easy victory. Later that night, Karath reviewed the files on Earth again. He saw their primitive rockets, their simple projectile weapons, their laughably divided countries. It all just proved what he already knew. This would be the easiest conquest of his career. As he drifted to sleep, Chaos's warning echoed in his mind, that bizarre idea of a species that would fight to the very last. He dismissed it as sentimental nonsense. No species could stand against the might of the Dominion. The humans would fall in line, just like everyone else. He closed his eyes and dreamed of a quick surrender. Billions of miles away on a tiny blue world, 3 billion people were just going about their day, driving to work, raising families, arguing over sports. They were falling in love, getting their hearts broken, and living their beautifully messy lives. They had absolutely no idea that a fleet of 500 warships was powering up to either enslave them or wipe them from existence. But hidden deep underground, in secret bunkers and classified labs scattered across the globe, some people knew we weren't alone. They had spent their lives preparing for a day they hoped would never come. So when the skies suddenly filled with alien ships, humanity wasn't going to be caught totally unprepared. And when they learned what the invaders demanded, a choice between slavery and extinction, something ancient and unbelievably ferocious was about to awaken in the heart of every single human. The Valorans were on their way to Earth. They had no clue what they were about to unleash. The Valoran Armada ripped through space-time, dropping out of warp just beyond the moon. 500 warships, each one as big as a city, fell into a terrifyingly perfect formation. Their polished hulls absorbed the light, and their weapon ports glowed with contained power. It was the largest fleet ever assembled for a single planet takeover, and High Commander Sarath stared at the blue and white marble below. "It's beautiful," he breathed, "and soon it will all be ours." His second-in-command, Varath, approached with a data slate. "Sir, initial scans are complete. The planet holds approximately 8 billion life forms. We've mapped their major population centers. All their primary military installations and communication networks have been located." "What about their defenses?" Cyrath asked, not looking away from the planet. "Primitive, sir, just as the intel suggested. They have some orbital satellites, but they're no threat to our fleet. On the ground, they're using chemical explosives and nuclear warheads, powerful by their standards, but our shields won't even flicker." Sirath gave a satisfied nod. Open a channel. It's time they met their new rulers. The Valoran signal instantly hijacked every TV, every radio, every phone on Earth. All at once, screens across the world went black, then lit up with a single horrifying image. Sirath's cold, gray face stared out from every device. His 4 eyes held no trace of compassion. "People of Earth," his voice announced, flawlessly translated into every language at once. "I am High Commander Sirath of the Valoran Dominion. Your planet now belongs to us. Any resistance is pointless and will lead to your complete and utter destruction." He let the threat hang in the air for a moment. "Our terms are simple. You will surrender unconditionally. You will provide us with your planet's resources, and you will deliver 30% of your population to serve the Dominion." In homes and hospitals, in offices and schools, people just stared, frozen in absolute shock. Most people figured it had to be the most insane prank ever pulled. But then they looked up at the sky and saw them, dark, silent shapes blocking out the stars. This was happening. "You have 72 hours to comply," Sirath's voice boomed. "Refuse, and we will obliterate your cities one by one. Fight back, and we will erase you. Your weapons are toys. Your ships are relics. Accept this and live, or defy us and die. The choice is yours." The broadcast ended. Sirath leaned back in his command chair with a smug smile. "Now we wait. In 3 days, that world will be begging for mercy." But on Earth, something he could never have imagined was starting to unfold. The first few hours were pure chaos, just as he'd expected. Panic swept the globe, riots broke out, and world leaders scrambled to respond to an impossible threat. Armies were put on high alert, even though they knew their tanks and jets were basically useless. But then, a strange quiet began to settle. The chaos subsided. And it wasn't just the riots that stopped. Decades-old wars suddenly went silent. Soldiers who had been enemies just hours before lowered their guns. Politicians who had built entire careers on hating each other were suddenly on the same side. An emergency summit was called at the United Nations. Every single nation on Earth sent a representative, and for the very first time in human history, there was no arguing. No grandstanding, no politics. There was only one item on the agenda. How do we fight back? The answer came from a place that officially didn't exist. Carved deep inside a mountain in the American Southwest was a top-secret facility built back in the 1960s during the peak of Cold War paranoia. For decades, its only mission was to plan for this exact scenario, and their day had finally arrived. General Sarah Chen, the base commander, stood before a wall of monitors displaying the enemy fleet. She was a short woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes that saw everything, and she had trained her entire life for this moment. "Report," she said, her voice calm and steady. A scientist named Dr. James Morrison stepped forward. "General, their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their shields are some kind of energy field that our missiles can't penetrate. They'll just bounce right off." "So we can't hit them," Chen said flatly. "Not head-on, no, but—" Morrison hesitated. "Spit it out, Doctor. We're on the clock." "Well," he continued, "there might be another way, a less direct way. If we can get them to come down here, onto our home turf, they're no longer invincible. Our scans indicate their body armor is designed to deflect energy blasts, not the raw, kinetic impact of a simple bullet." Chen let that sink in. "Their demand was 30% of our people. They have to send troops down to collect. They can't manage 8 billion people from orbit." "Precisely," Morrison said. bringing up another screen. There's one more thing. Their strategy is based on shock and awe. They've conquered dozens of worlds this way. Their entire war doctrine assumes that any logical species will surrender when outmatched. A thin, dangerous smile crept across General Chen's face. It was clear they had no idea who they were dealing with. Over the next 72 hours, something miraculous happened. For the first time in history, humanity became one. Nations shared their most advanced technologies. Lifelong enemies became allies. Every single resource on the planet, every soldier, every scientist, every factory was focused on one goal. They weren't preparing to surrender. They were preparing for war, and they were setting a trap. When the deadline passed, Sirath waited on his bridge, expecting a message of submission. Instead, he received a set of coordinates for a location in the American desert and a simple, chilling invitation. "You wanted to meet us? Come and get us." Sirath actually laughed. You have to almost admire their nerve. These creatures actually believed they could defy the Dominion. "High Commander, this has to be a trap," Vareth warned. "Obviously," Sireth scoffed, "but what sad little trap could these primitives cook up? We'll send down a ground team, stomp out their pathetic resistance, and teach them a lesson. After that, the rest of this world will fall right into line." He deployed 50,000 soldiers to the surface, the largest ground force he'd ever commanded. The transport ships tore through Earth's atmosphere and landed in the barren desert, right at the coordinates the humans had so helpfully provided. The Valoran soldiers streamed out, their weapons charged and ready. But they found nothing, absolutely nothing. Just endless sand, jagged rocks, and a silent, empty sky. The officer in charge radioed back to Sireth. "High Commander, the area is clear. There's no one here. It's totally deserted." Sireth's brow furrowed. "Scan the perimeter. They must be hiding." His soldiers fanned out, their advanced sensors sweeping across the dunes. Still, not a thing. Not a single human life sign for miles around. And that's when the ground began to shake. At first, the Valorans dismissed it as a simple tremor, but the shaking grew violent, and a deep, terrifying roar filled the air. Then they saw it, on every single horizon, a wall of pure, blinding fire. The humans had buried an entire arsenal of nuclear warheads all around them, dozens of them, planted in a perfect circle around the landing zone. They hadn't given the Valorans coordinates to a meeting place. They'd invited them to a graveyard. The commanding officer never even had a chance to scream before the atomic inferno turned him and everything else to vapor. Aboard his flagship, Sireth could only watch in stunned silence as 50,000 of his finest troops were erased in a single, brilliant flash. The patch of desert they had occupied was now a shimmering crater of radioactive glass. They torched their own land," Vareth stammered, horrified. "They poisoned a piece of their own world just to get our soldiers." Sireth stood frozen, all four of his eyes wide with a shock he'd never known. In all his centuries of conquering, no species had ever done something like this. When faced with superior power, civilizations either surrendered or they fled. They didn't weaponize their own planet. They didn't turn their home into a funeral pyre. A new message came through from Earth. It was short and to the point. "That was to get your attention. Are you ready to talk now?" Sireth's shock curdled into a white-hot rage. These insects had just annihilated 50,000 Valoran warriors. 50,000. An insult of that magnitude could not be ignored. "Forget capturing them," he snarled. "Forget enslaving them. We are going to burn this world to the bedrock. Begin orbital bombardment of their major population centers. Let's show them what real power looks like." Vareth looked nervous. "High Commander, Our orders were to take the planet intact if we caused too much damage. Our orders just changed. Sareth snapped, his voice dangerously calm. This species is a plague. They are too unpredictable to be allowed to exist. We will wipe them out and pick through the rubble for whatever is left. The Valoran fleet shifted into an attack formation. 500 warships took up positions over Earth's largest cities, their weapon ports glowing with world-ending energy. Down below, people looked up at the darkening skies and knew their time was up. There were no shields, no defenses that could stop what was coming. The aliens were about to make it rain fire, and millions were about to die. But instead of fear and despair, a different feeling swept across the planet. Something harder than fear. Defiance. If they were going out, they were going out fighting. If their cities were going to be turned to glass, they would make the enemy pay for every last inch. That nuclear gambit had taught humanity a critical lesson. The invaders could bleed. They could die. Their technology was incredible, but they weren't gods. The first plasma beams hit Tokyo. The city simply vanished in a silent, blinding flash. Millions of lives were snuffed out in an instant. The sheer scale of it was unimaginable. Buildings were vaporized, roads melted into glowing rivers of slag. A metropolis that had stood for centuries was gone in the blink of an eye. Next came Beijing, then Moscow, New York, London. From orbit, the Valorans watched as humanity's greatest monuments were wiped off the map. Surely this would be enough. Surely now they would beg for mercy. But the surrender never came. Instead, something else rose from the smoke and ash of the dying cities. Something the Valorans could not have predicted in a million years. Spaceships. Human spaceships. They were crude, ugly things, nothing like the graceful Valoran warships. They looked like they'd been hammered together from spare parts in a garage. But they were flying, climbing into the sky on pillars of fire, heading straight for the alien fleet. "That's impossible," Vareth whispered. Their planetary scans showed a pre-interstellar culture. Where did they get these ships? They came from the secret projects every major nation had been hiding for decades. Black budget programs, tucked away from public view, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. These ships were built in hidden underground hangars, armed with every weapon humanity could dream up, and crewed by men and women who knew they were on a one-way mission. The battle for Earth was on. The first wave of human ships slammed into the Valoran fleet and let loose with everything they had. Their weapons were like pea shooters against the alien energy shields, just simple missiles and kinetic rounds. But there were so many of them. A relentless, unending swarm. Most of the missiles shattered harmlessly, but every so often, a few would get through a weak spot where the shields had flickered. And when human steel met Valoran hull, it left a scar. The first Valoran ship exploded in a silent ball of fire, ripped open by a volley of missiles that should have been completely useless. Down on the burning surface, humanity roared in triumph. Sareth ordered his fleet to clear the skies of this human filth. It should have been easy. Valoran targeting systems were perfect, their weapons overwhelming. Human ships were obliterated by the dozens, vaporized before they could even get into firing range. But for every ship they destroyed, 2 more rose from the fires below to take its place. And the pilots never wavered. They never broke formation. When they ran out of ammunition, they just aimed their ships at the nearest enemy vessel and pushed the engines to full. They turned themselves into weapons. The first ramming attack took out a Valoran cruiser. The human pilot flew his burning wreck of a ship right into the enemy's command bridge. The resulting explosion killed thousands of Valorans and sent the crippled cruiser tumbling end over end into Earth's atmosphere. Vareth stared at the tactical map, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. They're doing it on purpose. They're killing themselves just to take us with them. I'm aware, you fool, Cirith bellowed. Destroy them all. But the humans just kept coming. From every continent, from hidden bases across the globe, more ships launched to join the fray. Their losses were horrifying. They were losing 3 or 4 ships for every Valoran vessel they managed to scratch. But they never, ever stopped. They finally managed to capture a human pilot and brought her to the bridge of Cirith's flagship. She was young, her face blistered from burns, one arm hanging limp at her side, but her eyes held no fear at all. Why are you doing this? Cirith demanded. You have no hope of victory. Your ships are pathetic. Your weapons are toys. For every one of our soldiers that falls, you lose thousands. Why continue this pointless slaughter? The pilot actually smiled, a bloody grin. You think we're fighting to win? She asked, her voice a defiant rasp. We're not trying to win. We're trying to make sure that everyone in the galaxy hears about the price of coming for Earth. We're fighting so that 1,000 years from now, when some other empire finds your ruins, they'll read about us and think twice. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a terrifying light. We are carving a warning into your history with our own blood, and we will keep carving it until there's no one left to hold the pen. Cirith just stared at her, and for the very first time in his long and decorated career of conquest, he felt a chilling sensation he had never known before. Genuine fear. He had brought entire worlds to heel. He had faced enemies with bigger armies and better technology, but he had never, ever encountered anything like this. The humans didn't fight logically. They didn't calculate their losses or the odds of survival. They simply refused to lose. The pilot was dragged away, but her words echoed in Cirith's mind. He walked to the main viewport and looked down at Earth. The planet was scarred and burning, great plumes of smoke rising from the skeletons of its cities. By every possible metric, the humans were being annihilated. Their losses were astronomical. Their civilization was being methodically erased. And still, they fought. Cirith remembered the ancient warnings from the Valoran elders, stories of long-dead empires that all repeated the same lesson: do not disturb the humans. He finally understood. These creatures weren't fighting a war for territory or resources. They were fighting a war against their own extinction. And somewhere deep in their DNA, they had learned that you can cheat death if you're willing to pay any price. In that moment, Cirith made a decision that had never before been made in the entire history of the Valoran Dominion. He gave the order to retreat. Can you imagine having the power to conquer entire galaxies, but getting stopped dead in your tracks by a species that just figured out how to send selfies into space? That was High Commander Sith, his voice cracking with desperation over a secured channel to the Galactic Conclave. I need backup. Send every ship you have. After a long, agonizing moment of static, a voice came back, dripping with contempt. High Commander, you have 500 warships. You're fighting a planet of primitives. How could you possibly need reinforcements? Right then, Scythe watched another human ship, basically a tin can with a rocket strapped to it, slam into a Valorian cruiser, turning them both into a silent ball of fire. Because I was wrong, he whispered. We were all wrong. This isn't a primitive world. This is all something else. And if we don't end this right now, I don't think we ever will. If the war for Earth was a raging inferno, and even though humanity was getting burned, It was fighting back with a fury no one had ever seen coming. And if you think that's wild, stick around, because you will not believe what they did next. Now the Valorant invaders were paying the price for that mistake, one ship at a time. It had been 6 months, 6 brutal months since their fleet blotted out the sun, half a year of non-stop war, of cities turned to glowing green glass and their own ships falling from the sky like rain. It was a level of destruction humanity had never even imagined. The casualty numbers were almost too big to comprehend. Over 2 billion people were just gone, wiped out by orbital bombardments, savage ground invasions, or the slow, agonizing crawl of starvation as the world fell apart. And yet, somehow, humanity was still fighting. From the command deck of his flagship, High Commander Scythe looked at a holographic map of Earth. The planet was a wreck, covered in massive, glowing scars that stretched across entire continents like open wounds. Dozens of its greatest cities were now just radioactive holes in the ground. The world's governments were gone, their leaders either dead or in hiding. According to every single rule in the Valorant art of war, Earth should have surrendered months ago. Any logical species would have thrown in the towel. The losses were too great, the odds were impossible. But as it turned out, the humans weren't being logical, they were being human. "Status report," Sith snapped. An officer named Varath came forward, with the same exhausted look that was now permanently etched onto every Valorant face in the fleet. This mission, which was supposed to be a 1-month cakewalk, had become a 6-month meat grinder. "Our effective fleet strength is down to 412 ships, Varath said, his voice flat. "We've lost 88 cruisers since the invasion began. Most were destroyed in kamikaze attacks or by those surprisingly powerful missiles they keep launching from the surface. And the reinforcements I pleaded for? Another 200 ships are en route, sir. They should arrive within the week." Sith gave a sharp nod, but it did nothing to hide the grim truth on his face. He had invaded this planet with 500 ships, facing an enemy that had no space fleet at all. Now he needed a total of 700 just to maintain control of the orbit. "And the ground war?" he asked. Varath took a breath, like he hated what he was about to say. "We have secured roughly 30% of the planet's surface, mostly in regions we've already bombed into dust, but the humans have completely reorganized everywhere else. They've built new command posts, new supply lines, and even new weapons factories, literally right under our feet." He pulled up a tactical map, which lit up with thousands of enemy positions. "They're building new ships faster than our analysts predicted. And these aren't the glorified garbage cans they first threw at us. These are smarter designs, cobbled together using technology they've scavenged and reverse engineered from our own downed vessels. Their weapons are getting more powerful. Their shielding, it's still primitive, but it's getting better every day." Sith just stared at the map, a cold knot of dread tightening in his gut. How? How is that even possible? We destroyed their cities, their industrial centers, their top universities. Where are they finding the resources for any of this? "From anywhere and everywhere," Varath replied. "They've turned every basement and garage into a small factory. They're digging for raw ore with shovels where they have to. They're training new pilots on simulators they built out of spare parts. Their entire surviving population is focused on one thing, this war." He hesitated, and his voice dropped. "Even the children. We've captured resistance fighters as young as 12. They're not on the front lines, but they're building munitions, running messages, and patching up the wounded. Their whole species has become a single giant war machine." Sith let that sink in. There were 8 billion humans when this started. 2 billion were dead. That left 6 billion people with one unified goal: kick the Valorans off their world. It was unheard of. In the entire history of the Valoran Dominion, No species had ever fought back this hard. Everyone else had a breaking point, a line they wouldn't cross, where the pain became too much and they would finally surrender. The humans, apparently, didn't have one. "There's more," Varath said, his tone getting even darker. "There's something you need to see." The display changed to show a ruined city in what used to be called Canada. The humans had built a new settlement inside the wreckage, a maze of underground tunnels and fortified buildings. "We captured this city 3 weeks ago," Varath said. "Our intelligence identified it as New Toronto. We rounded up the survivors to use as a labor force, as per the invasion plan." "And," Sith pushed, "and they killed every single soldier we stationed there to guard them." Sith's 4 eyes narrowed into slits. "How? They were disarmed. We took everything from them." "They made new weapons." Varath's voice was hollow, filled with a deep, unsettling awe. "Kitchen knives, sharpened pieces of rebar, clubs made from broken concrete. They even mixed cleaning chemicals to create agents that could melt through our body armor." He played a recording from a security camera. It was absolute chaos. A hallway was choked with Valoran soldiers trying to fight off a tidal wave of human beings. The people were armed with nothing but junk. Most of them were skinny and weak from hunger, but they just would not stop coming, climbing over their own dead to get to the invaders. "They planned the entire revolt using hand signals and whispers," Varath said. "We never saw it coming. One minute the camp was quiet, the next 20,000 humans were attacking us simultaneously all across the city." The footage showed a middle-aged woman, her face thin and pale, drive a shard of glass into the neck joint of a Valoran soldier's armor. As he went down, a dozen more humans swarmed him, literally tearing at his suit with their bare hands. "Our soldiers reported that the humans were smiling," Varath said, his voice just a whisper now. "They were smiling as they died. We picked up one last transmission from a lieutenant. He said, 'They won't stop coming. We've killed thousands. They just keep coming. They're smiling. Gods, why are they smiling?'" Sith watched the nightmare play out in total silence. The battle for New Toronto lasted for 18 hours. When it was finally over, every last Valoran soldier in the city was dead. The humans had taken horrific losses, but they had won. With knives and glass. "Pull all of our ground troops back from every single occupied city," Sith ordered, his voice like stone. "We can't hold this planet. The humans are too unpredictable." Varath nodded. "That was my conclusion as well. We have to win this war from orbit. We bomb them until there's nothing left for them to fight with. We can't set foot on that planet again." It was the only tactical option left, but it meant they were giving up on their original mission. This wasn't a conquest anymore. This was a war of extermination. And down on Earth, humanity knew it. They saw the Valoran forces pulling out of the cities and watched as the enemy fleet began to regroup for a massive orbital assault. They knew what was coming next, and they prepared for it. Deep inside a secret bunker buried under the Rocky Mountains, the last leaders of Earth's shattered governments held a final council of war. General Sarah Chen, the reluctant commander of what was left of humanity's unified military, stood before a wall of monitors. "The enemy is finished with trying to occupy us," she said, her voice clear and steady in the tense room. "They're going to try and wipe us off the face of the planet from space, bombing every shelter, one by one, till no one is left." The faces looking back at her were tired and grim, but none of them were broken. There were former presidents, generals, and lead scientists. Every single one had lost family, friends, and their entire way of life. They were all running on empty. But not one of them was ready to surrender. "So what do we do?" asked the former president of Russia, a man who looked like he carried the weight of his lost nation in his eyes. Chen brought up a new image on the main screen. "We've been building something," she said. "A secret project. It combines all the alien technology we've managed to salvage with the best ideas from our own engineers." The screen showed a fleet of warships, but they looked nothing like the flimsy fighters from the start of the war. These new ships were sharp, angular, and looked absolutely lethal. They weren't as sleek or elegant as the Valorant cruisers, but you could almost feel the raw power coming off them. "We're calling it the Phoenix Fleet," Chen announced. 57 ships built in hidden facilities scattered all across the globe. Every one of them is equipped with weapons that can tear right through Valorant shields, thanks to the technology we reverse-engineered from their own wrecks. 57 ships against more than 400, the Chinese representative said quietly, and they have 200 more on the way. "I'm aware of the odds," Chen shot back, her gaze firm. "But these ships are more advanced than anything we've ever built, and more importantly, our pilots are better than anyone the Valorans have ever faced in their entire history." She looked from one leader to the next. "For 6 months, they had rained fire on our cities, turning monuments to dust and homes to graves. They called us primitive, insects to be crushed under their boot. What they didn't realize was that when you back a cornered animal against a wall, it doesn't just give up, it grows fangs. And our fangs were forged in the scrap heaps of our broken world. If you want to see how humanity went from the brink of extinction to the galaxy's most feared warriors, you need to hear this story." "They've learned to kill with scrap metal," General Chen said, her voice like grinding steel. "They've flown ships held together with duct tape and prayers straight into the enemy's heart. They have done the impossible again and again simply because they refuse to die." She looked at the faces of the last pilots Earth had left. "The Valorans think they know war? They don't. They've only fought enemies who knew how to surrender. They have never faced an enemy that has forgotten how. We are going to teach them." 3 days later, it was on. From hidden bases carved into mountains and sunk beneath the sea, 57 human ships, our entire Phoenix fleet, blasted into the sky in a single, perfectly coordinated wave. The Valorans spotted them instantly. On their bridge, the commander chuckled. "More desperate flies buzzing into the fire," he said to his subordinate. "Will they ever learn?" He gave a lazy command, "Wipe them out." But something was wrong. When the Valoran cannons lit up the sky, the human ships danced aside with a grace they'd never shown before. When plasma bolts slammed into their shields, the barriers flickered and sparked, but they held on seconds longer than physics should have allowed. And when the human ships fired back, their weapons, cobbled together from alien salvage, struck with a terrifying new precision. The first Valoran cruiser went down in minutes, its hull ripped open by missiles that seemed to have a map of its weakest points. A second went silent, then a third exploded into a beautiful, terrible cloud of debris. The Valoran commander's smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a cold knot of shock in his stomach. His superior numbers weren't making a difference. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning dogfights, pilot against pilot. Their patched-up ships moved like a pack of wolves, covering each other, pouncing on weakened targets, and then vanishing, only to strike again from a new, unexpected angle. "How?" the commander choked out, his voice cracking. "How is this possible?" The answer was painfully simple. For months, those pilots had lived in simulators, eating and sleeping with the data from every Valoran attack, learning every turn, every tactic, every flaw, until they knew their enemy better than the enemy knew themselves. They had dissected every battle, every loss, and built a new playbook from the ashes. But they had a secret weapon the Valorans could never download: pure, unfiltered desperation. Every pilot knew this was it. Lose here, and humanity becomes a footnote in a galactic history book. There was no retreat, no second chances. They fought with the chilling fury of people who had nothing left to lose but had everything in the world to protect. For hours, the battle was a maelstrom of light and fire. Human ships died in brilliant flashes of light, but for every one that fell, a Valoran warship went with it. The kill ratio, once laughably one-sided, was now terrifyingly even. When the Phoenix fleet finally broke off, they left the ghosts of 17 of their own ships behind. But floating beside them was the shattered wreckage of 31 Valoran warships. It was the first time in this long, bloody war that humanity had truly won. On Earth, huddled in subway tunnels and makeshift bunkers, the news spread like wildfire. For the first time in 6 agonizing months, a spark of genuine hope ignited in the darkness. The monsters weren't invincible. They could bleed. The alien High Commander Sith received the report with a quiet, simmering rage. 31 ships, his ships, lost to a species that was barely out of its planetary cradle. He turned to his second-in-command. The reinforcements. When do they get here? 2 more days, sir, Vareth replied. Contact the Conclave, Sith snarled. Tell them we need more ships. Tell them... He had to force the words out. Tell them Earth is a far greater threat than we ever calculated. Miles away, on the shimmering world of Theron Prime, the Galactic Conclave got the message, and a stunned silence fell over the chamber. A primitive, backwater world had just obliterated 88 of the Dominion's top-tier warships since the invasion began. It had to be a mistake, but the data was clean. Elder Chaos stood before the council again, his ancient face etched with weariness, not victory. You were warned, he said, his voice a low rumble. I told you what these humans were. I told you they would never surrender. I told you they would burn their own planet to cinders before they would ever kneel. The Council Prime leaned forward, his voice tight with anxiety. What do you suggest we do, Elder? Chaos let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I suggest, he said slowly, that for the first time you consider the one option this council has refused to even imagine, that we might not win this war, that every ship we send is just delaying the inevitable. That's absurd, a council member shot back. We have an armada of thousands. Earth has a few hundred at best. For now, Chaos said calmly. But let's look at the facts. 6 months ago, humans had no space fleet. Today, they have ships that can challenge ours. They went from chemical rockets to energy shields in half a year. What do you suppose they'll have in another 6 months? A year? A decade? He gestured to the battle logs. This species learns faster than any we have ever encountered. They adapt. They improvise. Every weapon we use against them, they find a counter. Every strategy we deploy, they find a way to break it. And they never, ever stop. The chamber was utterly silent. There is an old saying on my world, Chaos went on, never poke a sleeping beast. We did something far worse. We didn't just poke the humans, we showed them that there are monsters hiding between the stars. We gave them a reason to unlock technologies that should have taken them centuries. He met the eyes of each council member. In our arrogance to conquer Earth, we may have accidentally created our own extinction event, a species that will not rest until either they are gone or we are. Back on a ruined Earth, General Chen stood amidst the rubble of a city, staring up at the stars. She knew the Valorans were up there, wounded but not beaten. And she knew more were on their way. This war was far from over. But something had shifted. For 6 months, humanity had been fighting for survival. Now, for the first time, they were fighting for victory. An officer sprinted up to her, breathing hard. General, Intel just cracked more of their comms. The enemy is screaming for reinforcements, a whole lot more. A faint smile touched Chen's lips. Good, she said. "It means we're finally scaring them." "There's more, ma'am," the officer said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Our science teams, they had a breakthrough. Using the captured alien tech, they think they can crack faster than light travel, maybe in just a few months." Chen's small smile disappeared, replaced by an expression as hard and cold as deep space. "Then this war won't be staying in our solar system for long," she whispered. "Sooner or later, we're taking the fight to them." She looked back at the stars, those twinkling lights that once seemed so peaceful. "The Valorans came to our home to exterminate us, to chain us, to break our spirit. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. They were about to learn what happens when you corner humanity and give them a reason to reach for the stars. The next part of this war was about to begin, and for the first time, we were the ones holding the pen. A full year had passed since the sky first turned dark, 12 months of fire and loss that would have broken any other race. Our population had been cut in half, from 8 billion souls to less than 4 billion. Half of everyone we had ever known gone in the blink of an eye. And yet somehow, humanity had never been stronger. The Phoenix fleet had grown from a scrappy 57 ships to over 300 warships. Factories built on the graves of our cities now worked 24/7, churning out a new generation of weapons. Scientists who once competed for awards now shared secrets in underground labs, rewriting the laws of physics just to give us a fighting chance. And then, they did it. They cracked the code. Faster than light travel was real. The first ship to make the jump was named fittingly the Defiance. She wasn't a beautiful ship. She was a scarred, ugly block of metal built for one purpose: to hit back. But when her prototype FTL drive spooled up and the ship simply vanished from Earth's orbit, only to reappear a moment later behind the moon, a single unified cheer echoed across the planet. We were no longer trapped in our cage. The galaxy was now our battlefield, but the war at home was a brutal meat grinder. The Valorans had doubled their fleet to over 600 ships, and they were learning too. They changed their tactics, adapting to our strategies. The battles in orbit became savage brawls, with both sides suffering terrible losses. High Commander Sith was no longer the arrogant conqueror. The ghost of Elder Chaos's warnings now haunted his every decision. The officer standing in there was a ghost of his former self, a man haunted by the faces of thousands of his best soldiers, all lost fighting an enemy that simply refused to die. "Status report," he sighed, the words worn thin from overuse. Vareth, looking just as exhausted, pulled up the tactical display. "The human fleet is now at 312 warships. After last week's battle, we're down to 574. Their technology is advancing at a terrifying pace. Their weapons are nearly as good as ours. Their shields can now soak up multiple hits from our main cannons, and their tactics." Vareth just shook his head in disbelief. "They're completely unpredictable. Every single time we engage, they pull some new, insane maneuver out of thin air." Sith stared at the numbers glowing on the screen. The Dominion still had the upper hand, but that lead was slipping away a little more each day. Just 1 year ago, the idea that humans could ever match Valoran tech was a joke. Now, it felt inevitable. "Anything new from the Conclave?" he asked. "Yeah, they're starting to panic. Word of our losses is beginning to spread across the Dominion, and the other species we've conquered are starting to notice." This was Sith's deepest fear. The entire Valoran Dominion was held together by the myth of their own invincibility. 100 different worlds stayed in line because they believed resistance was futile. If that belief ever shattered, "What exactly are they seeing?" Sith asked, his voice barely a whisper. Varath switched the screen, showing him the secret video files spreading like wildfire through the Dominion's hidden networks. For months, these grainy, chaotic videos had been bouncing around the galaxy's hidden corners. They showed things that shouldn't be possible. Clunky, primitive human ships ramming themselves into the side of sleek Valoran battlecruisers. Human soldiers, hopelessly outgunned, fighting with a ferocity that made no sense. At first, Ver explained, the other conquered races watched it like a spectator sport. They'd laugh and say, "Look at those poor primitives fighting a war they can never win." But as the months turned into a year, the laughter stopped. Worlds that had been crushed under the Dominion's heel for centuries saw these humans refuse to bow, and they started asking dangerous questions. Questions like, if these newcomers with their clumsy ships and zero experience can fight back this hard, what could we do? And the most dangerous question of all, if we all stood up together, could the Dominion really stop every single one of us? A cold fear began to crawl up Sir's spine. This was the exact nightmare Elder Chaos had warned them about. The humans weren't just fighting for their own world. They were accidentally lighting the fuse of a galactic revolution. On a dozen different planets, in secret meetings held in darkness, the same scenes were being watched. The Kathrani, a proud warrior race that was defeated 5,000 years ago, saw footage of human pilots turning their crippled ships into guided missiles, sacrificing themselves just to take one enemy with them. They remembered their own failed rebellion and started to wonder, what if? The Vorath, a species of brilliant mathematicians, began to recalculate the odds of a galaxy-wide uprising. For centuries, the answer had always been the same: suicide. But now, with the Dominion's main fleet bogged down in a brutal stalemate over Earth, the variables were starting to look very different. The Centauri, a race of artists and musicians who had been forced to produce nothing but propaganda for their masters, began to secretly compose new music. They wrote anthems about defiance, ballads about a distant planet called Earth, and hymns for a future they were only now daring to dream of. And the children of the burning star, an ancient species nearly wiped out by the Dominion, watched the humans fight and felt something they thought was long dead flicker back to life inside them. Hope. It all finally came to a head at a tiny hidden space station tucked away in the swirling clouds of a gas giant. Here, representatives from 12 different conquered species met in total secrecy. If they were caught, it meant instant execution for treason, but for the first time in centuries, the risk seemed worth it. "We've all been watching the footage," said the Cathan representative, a towering insectoid with shimmering wings. "These humans have held on for a full year. They've destroyed hundreds of Valoran warships. They have somehow, impossibly, developed technology that is beginning to rival our masters, and they have made it clear they will never, ever surrender." A small, furry Vorath delegate with huge, intelligent eyes then dropped an even bigger bombshell. "It's even more than that. Our intelligence has confirmed they've achieved faster than light travel. For the first time ever, human ships have been spotted outside their own solar system. They're not just defending anymore. They're expanding." The Centauri artist, whose voice was as beautiful as a song, asked the one question on everyone's mind. "So, what are we going to do about it?" The room fell into a heavy silence. They all knew the answer, but there's a huge difference between thinking something and actually doing it. "If we rise up and we fail, the Dominion will wipe us from existence," the Vorath said, his voice shaking. "They've done it to others for far less." The Kathrani warrior slammed his fist on the table. "But if we do nothing, we remain slaves forever. We have sat by and watched humans die for a freedom that should be ours too. How much longer can we just watch?" The argument raged on for hours, a battle between generations of fear and this new, fragile spark of hope. And finally, they made a decision. They would try to contact the humans. The message they sent was simple and direct, smuggled through a network of spies and pirates, bouncing from one hidden relay to another to cover its tracks. It said, "To the people of Earth, we are the worlds conquered by the valor and dominion. We have watched your struggle with awe. We offer you our knowledge, our resources, and our alliance. Together, we can bring this tyranny to an end." Back on Earth, in a makeshift command center built from the ruins of New York City, a young technician's eyes went wide. "General Chen," he shouted, "you need to see this, right now." Chen read the message once, then twice, then a third time. Allies, real allies, from inside the very heart of the enemy's empire. This changed everything. She began to type a reply, feeling the weight of history in every single word. "To the conquered peoples of the valor and dominion, we accept your offer with gratitude and solidarity. We did not ask for this war, but we promise you we will finish it. We fight not just for our world, but for every world that suffers under your masters. Send us everything you know. We will use it well. And when the time is right, we will fight alongside you. The Dominion's days are numbered. That is our promise. Humanity stands with you." And just like that, in the shadows of the galaxy, the Great Alliance was born. A secret river of information began to flow from the oppressed worlds to Earth. They sent star charts, fleet positions, security codes, every single weakness the Dominion had. And in return, humanity sent them something even more powerful, the spirit of defiance. They sent back guides on how to form resistance groups, how to sabotage factories, and how to fight an enemy with better technology. But woven into every single message was a simple, powerful idea that resonated with every species. You are only truly defeated when you give up. As long as you keep fighting, you can never really be conquered. The Dominion rules through fear. Show them you are no longer afraid, and their empire will crumble into dust. Soon after, small acts of sabotage started happening all over the empire. Factory output mysteriously dropped. Critical supply shipments for the war fleet would get accidentally rerouted. It wasn't enough to trigger a massive retaliation, but it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And then, the humans arrived. The first ship to appear was called the Defiance. It materialized out of nowhere in the skies of a Kathrani colony, right in the middle of a Valoran patrol. The enemy ships immediately opened fire, but the Defiance moved with impossible speed, dancing between their energy blasts. It fired back with surgical precision, obliterating 2 patrol ships in a matter of seconds before vanishing back into deep space. The entire attack was over in less than a few minutes, but its impact would last forever. The humans were real. They weren't just some grainy figures in a video anymore. They were here, bringing the war right to the Dominion's front door. Down on the Kathrani colony below, the streets erupted in cheers. When the Valoran soldiers moved in to disperse the crowds, they weren't met with fear. They were met with open rebellion. The dam of fear that had held for centuries had finally burst. All across the Dominion, the story repeated itself. A lone human ship would appear, strike a quick, decisive blow for freedom, and then vanish, leaving behind a shockwave of hope. Each attack was small, but the message was enormous. The galaxy had been watching Earth. But now, Earth was watching back. High Commander Sir read the reports, a cold knot of panic tightening in his stomach. This wasn't a war of conquest anymore. It was a galactic firestorm. "We have to end this now," he screamed in an emergency broadcast to the Council. "We must pull back all of our fleets, throw everything we have at Earth and burn it to the ground before this rebellion tears us apart. And leave the rest of our territories completely undefended," the Council Prime snapped back. "We already have full-blown uprisings on 3 worlds. If we move the main fleet, we could lose everything else." It was a perfect trap with no way out. If they focused on the humans, they would lose their empire. If they tried to protect their empire, the humans would grow into an unstoppable galactic power. Every option led to their own destruction. From the shadows of the chamber, Elder Chaos spoke for the very last time. There is one path you have not yet considered. The entire council turned to face him. Peace, Chaos said simply. End the war. Withdraw your forces from Earth and treat them as equals. The chamber exploded in outrage. Peace with those primitives? The Council Prime scoffed. We would look weak. Every single world we control would rise up against us. They are already rising up, Chaos replied, his calm voice cutting through the noise like a blade. And they'll keep fighting back as long as those humans have a sliver of hope. But if we offer peace, that hope vanishes. Their little rebellions will have no one to rally behind. He let his words sink in. We made a mistake. We kicked a hornet's nest. Now we can either spend the next 100 years fighting a war that will bleed our dominion dry, or we can swallow our pride and ensure our own survival. The council bickered for days, but in the end, drunk on their own power, they refused to make peace, and with that single decision, they sealed their own doom. The Dominion's answer was crystal clear. Surrender was off the table. Showing any hint of weakness was unacceptable. The war would continue until Earth was just a story told in history books. Chaos could only nod, his heart sinking as he walked out of the chamber. He had tried, but the Warhawks had won. Half a galaxy away, General Chen received the news from her intelligence network. They aren't stopping, she told her commanders, her voice dangerously quiet. They will keep coming until one of us is wiped from existence. Admiral Rodriguez slammed a fist on the holographic table. Then we'll make damn sure it's them, he roared, his eyes filled with fire. Our new fleet is almost online. Give us 1 more month, and we'll have enough firepower to knock on their front door. Chen gave a slow, measured nod. For a full year, humanity had been playing defense, desperately trying to keep their home from being scorched clean. But they all knew you can't win a war just by taking hits. Eventually, you have to hit back. That time had finally come. She looked out at the star-filled void, a galaxy that had felt like an impossible dream just 2 years ago. They had sacrificed so much, lost so many people. But through that fire, humanity had forged something new, a common cause, a unity they'd never experienced before, and the powerful truth that they were not alone in this fight. Get our allies on the comms, she ordered. Tell them it's go time. We're ending this war, and when we're done, the galaxy will remember what happens when you corner the human race. The final chapter was about to be written. It had been 2 long years since the first Valoran warships had cast their shadows over Earth, 2 years of a vicious war that had transformed a species that could barely get to its own moon into a galactic force to be reckoned with. The cost had been unimaginable. 4 billion human lives had been snuffed out. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were now nothing more than glowing radioactive scars on the planet's surface. Earth itself was wounded, its climate thrown into disarray by the constant orbital strikes. But humanity had survived, and it had grown stronger. The human fleet now numbered over 500 ships, secretly constructed in hidden bases around the globe and on the moon. Every ship was a work of art, born from a mix of desperation and genius, cobbled together from stolen Valoran technology and pure human ingenuity. They weren't elegant, but they were deadly. And this time, they weren't going in by themselves. Warships from 12 different species, all once crushed by the Dominion, had answered the call. Together, they formed the first real alliance against the Valoran Empire. The Kathrani shared their hard-fought intel on Valoran tactics. The Vorath brought their unparalleled gift for strategy. The Cathari provided communications technology that was virtually uncrackable. And the children of the Burning Star, a race that had lost everything, brought a fury that burned just as brightly as humanity's. They called their united force the Liberation Fleet. General Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the Unconquered, gazing at a holographic map of the entire galaxy. 2 years ago, a view like this was something you'd only see in a movie. Now, it was her war room. "Give me the status report," she said, her voice calm and unwavering. Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward. "All ships are in position, General. 512 human vessels, 347 Allied ships. That gives us a grand total of 859 ships." Chen nodded. It was the largest fleet ever assembled to challenge the Dominion, but they were still heavily outnumbered. Intel confirms the Valorans have recalled over 1,000 ships to defend their homeworld, Theran Prime. They've arranged them in a defensive shell, expecting us to make a brute force charge and try to punch a hole through their lines. "And that," she said, a small, grim smile touching her lips, "is exactly what we're not going to do." Chen looked at the Allied commanders sharing her bridge. "Today, we're going to give the galaxy a lesson in what happens when free people stand together. Today, we dismantle an empire." The plan had taken months to perfect. It wasn't a head-on assault, but a complicated, multi-layered attack designed to exploit every weakness they had discovered. The entire fleet jumped to hyperspace. When they dropped back into normal space near Theran Prime, the Valoran armada was right where they expected. Over 1,000 warships hung in the void, a perfect, terrifying formation with their weapons charged and shields shimmering. Right in the middle sat the colossal flagship of High Commander Syra. He watched the approaching fleet, his expression a mask of cold determination. He'd been fighting those humans for 2 years. He'd lost friends, ships, and a huge chunk of his original fleet, but he refused to lose here. The very future of the Dominion rested on this battle. "All ships prepare to engage," he commanded. "This is where we crush them for good." But the Liberation Fleet didn't charge. Instead, it fractured, breaking up into smaller, seemingly disorganized squadrons that scattered in every direction. The Valorans, sensing an easy kill, surged forward to hunt down what they assumed were panicked, fleeing targets. It was the perfect trap. Those scattered groups weren't running. They were decoys. And just as the Dominion ships broke their tight formation to chase them, the real assault began. A second wave of ships dropped out of hyperspace, materializing directly behind the Valoran fleet. These were smaller, faster ships, overloaded with heavy weapons and crewed by volunteers on a one-way trip. Their targets weren't the battleships. They were the supply lines and communication relays that held the enemy fleet together. In a matter of minutes, the Valoran armada was flying blind. Ships that were once part of a flawless military machine were suddenly isolated, cut off from their commanders and their wingmen. "Re-establish the lines," Syra bellowed, but his orders were lost in a sea of communication static. And that's when the Liberation Fleet hit them with absolutely everything they had. Human ships flew side by side with their new allies, smashing into the confused Valoran forces. The Kathrani ships used precision strikes to disable enemy engines. The Vorath coordinated complex attack patterns with terrifying accuracy. And the humans? They fought like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. The Battle of Theran. Prime raged for 18 solid hours, the most brutal conflict the galaxy had ever seen. The space around the planet turned into a graveyard of burning, twisted metal. But slowly, inch by painful inch, the Liberation Fleet started to win. Valoran ships were being torn apart faster than they could be replaced. Their once invincible formation was now just a collection of small, desperate pockets of ships fighting for survival. With every Valoran vessel that erupted into a ball of fire, a little more of their hope died with it. From the bridge of his flagship, Syra watched his fleet get systematically dismantled. His tactical screen was a nightmare of red alerts. His losses were staggering. The Liberation Fleet was taking heavy damage too, but they just wouldn't stop. "High Commander," his first officer said, his voice completely empty. "It's over. We have to surrender." Cyrus stood in silence. Surrender? In 10,000 years of history, a Valoran fleet had never surrendered. The very word was a disgrace. But as he watched another one of his squadrons get blown to pieces by human torpedoes, he knew the only other option was total annihilation. "Send the signal," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "All ships, cease fire. We surrender." The cannons fell silent. All across the battlefield, ships that had been locked in a fatal embrace moments before drifted apart, their crews staring out in shocked silence. Then, slowly, the Liberation Fleet began to advance, forming a perfect ring around the defeated Dominion forces. When General Chen got the word, she didn't celebrate. Too many had paid the ultimate price for that. But she felt a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. They had done it. They had actually won. Her shuttle, escorted by human marines, flew toward Syra's flagship. The gigantic Valoran ship was scarred and broken, but it was still intact. Chen walked its corridors, her soldiers at her back, past Valoran crew members, who stared at her with a mixture of fear and wonder. She found Syra in his command center, standing amidst the wreckage of his command. He looked like a man who had aged 100 years in a single day. "High Commander Syra," Chen said, her tone level. "Your fleet is shattered. Your empire is finished. Is there anything you wish to say?" Syra slowly turned to face her. This small human woman, with a scarred face and a prosthetic arm, had achieved what everyone thought was impossible. She had brought the all-powerful Dominion to its knees. "Your own elder tried to warn you," Chen said before he could speak. "You should have listened to him." Syra gave a slow, weary nod. "Yes, we should have. We were arrogant. We thought our power made us gods. We never realized that true strength comes from something else entirely." He looked at her, and for the very first time she saw respect in his eyes. "What will happen to us now?" Chen's expression was as hard as granite. "The Dominion is hereby dissolved. The worlds you held captive are now free. Your fleet will be taken apart screw by screw, and your planets will be governed by councils made up of the very people you once enslaved." She moved in, her voice a razor-sharp whisper. "But you won't live to see it. You're the one who signed the order that wiped out 4 billion of my people. You're the one who burned our cities down to the bedrock. You slaughtered our children. So for you, there's no courtroom, no banishment, only this." Syra met his fate with a slow, accepting nod. He hadn't expected anything less. "Before you do it," he said, his voice steady, "could I send one final broadcast? A message for my people and for every system that watched our empire crumble?" She considered it for a long second, then gave a sharp nod. Syra opened the channel to the entire galaxy. "This is High Commander Syra. I'm speaking to my own surviving people, to the races we once oppressed, and to every civilization that witnessed our fall. We were arrogant. We were fools. We were wrong." He took a ragged breath, the truth of his own words crushing him. 2 years ago, my empire targeted a small, forgotten blue planet on the edge of a spiral arm. We thought it would be an easy conquest, The creatures living there seemed so disorganized. Their technology looked like children's toys. They were constantly fighting amongst themselves. We wrote them off as a non-threat. His voice cracked, dropping to a haunted murmur. It was the single greatest mistake in the history of the universe. We thought we were crushing an ant, but we had just declared war on the most terrifyingly resourceful and unified predator the cosmos has ever known. We woke something that should have been left to sleep. And now, our entire species is paying the ultimate price. He stared directly at the camera, his eyes begging for understanding. If you are receiving this message, I am begging you to understand our mistake. It's the same warning our own ancestors passed down, a warning we laughed at. Stay away from Earth. Do not antagonize the humans. Don't even breathe in a way that they might see as a threat. If you approach them in peace, you'll find they are shockingly compassionate. They make incredible allies and devoted friends. They will share everything they have with you. But, he paused, a look of pure terror on his face. If you threaten their home, if you harm what they love, if you back them into a corner and force their hand, then I promise you, whatever gods you worship won't be able to save you.